Okay, let's move on to protection of the brain. Obviously, we have the skull, but underneath that, we have some connective tissue layers. Those are collectively called the meninges. If that is singular, it's called the meninx. Meninx, sort of like phalanx, meninx. So the outermost one here is called the dura. Dura as in tough, the tough mother. So dura mater here. Then we have the arachnoid matter. So looking at the picture here, why do you think it's called arachnoid? Arachnoid's like spiders, right? So it looks like spiders. And so it's called the arachnoid matter because it looks very spidery. So as you peel up the dura mater underneath it, you're going to see a bunch of thin spiders, spidery web-like structures. That would be the arachnoid matter. And then the pia mater is going to line directly on the brain itself. And then it's very important for you to understand that the pia mater follows all of the gyri, the elevations, and all of the sulcus, the depressions between them. Okay, so directly smack lining on the brain itself, that would be the pia mater, the pia mater. So what was that outermost one? The tough mother would be the dura mater, and then underneath it we would have the arachnoid matter and then the pia mater on the brain itself. Okay, let's look at cavities. So inside of the brain is not solid. Inside the brain you have a collection of cavities. Those cavities are called ventricles. And the reason they have those cavities is because they're filled with a fluid that's called the cerebral spinal fluid. And what that does is help maintain a particular pressure that the cells, the neurons require in order for their proper functioning. Okay, so that's called intracranial pressure. So the pressure inside the cranium that helps maintain that pressure with the cerebral spinal fluid. So we have two lateral ventricles. So remember lateral means away from the midline. And so for these right here, these big ones here, those are the lateral ventricles. There are two of them. Both of them are called lateral ventricle. So there's not one and two. They're just called lateral ventricle. And then in the middle here, so if you look at it from the frontal section, these two right here would be the lateral ventricles. And then in the middle here, right about where the thalamus would be, so this is where the thalamus would be here, that is called the third ventricle, And then coming down here, right anterior to the cerebellum, is the fourth ventricle. And connecting the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle is the cerebral aqueduct. And so what an aqueduct is a channel that moves water around. Like in farming, that's where that name comes from. That is the cerebral aqueduct, connecting the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. You wouldn't see it on this picture. All you see in this picture are the two lateral ventricles and then the third ventricle there. Oh, and also surrounding the outside, so underneath the arachnoid matter is what's called the subarachnoid space. And so when you think about the brain is sort of just floating around in this collection of cerebral spinal fluid around it. And that cerebral spinal fluid is going to be found in the subarachnoid space, which is underneath, so underneath the arachnoid matter. So you can actually look and follow the movement, the flow of the cerebral spinal fluid. So remember when we were talking about neuroglia and we talked about the ependymal cells, and those ependymal cells, their job is they have those cilia that create the currents that cause the cerebral spinal fluid to flow. Okay, so what happens is the choroid plexus, and a plexus is just a collection, like a matting of blood vessels. The choroid plexus will create the cerebral spinal fluid. Usually that's created in the floor of the lateral ventricles or the roof of the third ventricles. Both of them have choroid plexes. And what they create the cerebral spinal fluid, and then it'll continue to flow. So the pathway that it flows is from the lateral ventricle down into the third ventricle, and then using the cerebral aqueduct, it'll take it to the fourth ventricle, and then from the fourth ventricle, it'll either continue around the outside of the brain in the subarachnoid space, or it could go down into the central canal, which is the middle part of the spinal cord. So the fluid just sort of flows around through there. I think this is a really good way to study the ventricles because it's going to, if you follow the flow, you're going to hit all of the structures related to the ventricles. Okay, that's enough for the brain. Go ahead and continue on to the spinal cord lecture now.